Hello. Oh, very good. I now have the pleasure to call before you our Calling the Watchdogs Media Roundtable. And the folks that you will see sitting before you, I will do a very brief introduction. Please take a look, of course, in the bios for more exhaustive. Their career certainly is hard to capture in a few sentences. But you see at the far left there, Chuck Quirmbach, who I expect many of you have heard his voice. He's an essential reporter covering environmental issues and other concerns for Wisconsin Public Radio. Next to him is Paul Hayes, who's an environmental journalist whose illustrious career spanned 37 years, and he has earned him national recognition, and his work did not end there. And then closest to me, who I've enjoyed talking to but I haven't gotten to officially meet yet, is Karen Lincoln Michel. She is the editor of Madison Magazine and the current board vice president of the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism, which we heard a bit about yesterday. Welcome to all of you. What I'm really hoping for, again, is questions from all of you, which I think has energized and benefited this conference more than anything. I'm going to ask a few questions just to get the conversation going, so thank you for taking it from there. One question that I know is at the forefront of my mind in terms of calling you together, and perhaps many folks here, is we are interested in getting tips from you, advice, recommendations. If you could take us to those days when you've experienced a slew of press releases coming in the door before you, and if you could advise us, let people know how they could get their stories, their concerns before print and TV. What recommendations in terms of how to pitch it or how to frame their concerns, how to communicate with you, that would be really helpful just as a starting point.
And this is on, thank you. So I'm Chuck Quirmbach, a Wisconsin Public Radio reporter. I'm based in Milwaukee. I work with various colleagues around the state of Wisconsin. We have about 12 reporters in various 6 or 7 markets in the state. I tend to cover environment and energy and also Milwaukee news of statewide interest, whatever you want to say that is. But so we try to get at environmental and energy issues as much as we can, either myself or my colleagues, depending on where the story is happening closest to their, if it's happening closer to their market. But there's also a case of resource issues in terms of reporters in the newsroom, and that we can't get to every story every day. People are busy on other stories. People are out of the office getting research, doing research, gathering audio, and so on. As far as tips, I guess I would just, make sure you have, for public radio, for the statewide public radio network, it's all on our website, wpr.org, and there's links to our news page and our reporters around the state of Wisconsin. And we welcome emails, of course, and follow-up phone calls from people recommending story ideas. We get press releases from various state agencies and interest groups from the left and the right and somewhere in the middle. And so we just try to figure out what's a really big issue and whether we handle it in a really short form, they call it spot news story, or whether we can make it into a 3.5-minute feature that might either air that afternoon if it's a big deal. I know Sean Johnson today is working on the John Doe ruling out of the state Supreme Court, probably doing a lengthier story, or whether we need a day or two or a week to get out in the field to properly get the sound. So find us. It's pretty easy to find us. We're all University of Wisconsin Extension employees, right there in the public, and we've benefited from public dollars and listener dollars, so we are responsive by nature and by job and by interest. So just find us and we'll reach out, and if we can't do something right away, we'll either tell you that we don't quite think it's a news story, or we'll find a way to get one of our reporters on it, or say, well, this maybe isn't quite a today thing. It'd be a great sound feature, though. Can you recommend places to go, where to get sound, where to get action? We try to show action in radio as well as television folks do as well. Action is often describing or walking or sound and so on. So I've kind of given my spiel and happy to follow up with any questions you have. Paul?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and thanks the Ho-Chunk Nation for this grand hospitality and for your wisdom. I'm happy to be here. I'm really happy I wasn't here as a working reporter. This would have been a nightmare conference to cover for a daily newspaper. I would have had to file, because I spent some of the budget for travel to get here, I would have had to file a story by telephone for maybe one of 2 editions for 2 days, possibly up to 250 words each. Now, I don't know if you've been counting the words of this conference, but condensation and is a challenge, and clarity is too, although the speeches here have been grand, and I have enjoyed it, and that's why I've enjoyed it. I'm not on deadline. I want to share with you a little bit about what we've lost. I retired 20 years ago on the day the Milwaukee Journal merged with the Milwaukee Sentinel to become the Journal Sentinel. I had worked for that newspaper for 33 years, and I had started out covering transportation and public planning before the political environmental movement of the later 1960s gathered a lot of steam. And I was one of the first full-time environmental reporters in the country and spent many years doing that. And then that evolved into energy and finally natural sciences. Then the last 5 years I spent working on Wisconsin, the Journal's Sunday magazine. There are many people here who didn't even realize that newspapers could have Sunday magazines locally produced. And in 1990, I did a story on wolves, and I interviewed Dick Thiel, and I interviewed Adrian. And before the magic number of 350 had been brought into play, I want to read you, because we are obliged to seek out the other side, I want to read you a quote from one of the critics of the early wolf efforts. I found him in Gilman, and he said 200 to 300 wolves in the northern boundary wilderness in Minnesota is enough wolves from Minnesota and the rest of the USA. The misguided wolf-loving kooks could be educated along these lines with 1/10 of the effort it took to bring on this wolf-loving mania. But look at how many damned wolf promoters would have to start earning an honest living for a change if this happened. Fortunately, he was a minor player in my story, and I was able to report in the next paragraph, he and his other critics have had their say at public hearings in newspapers and elsewhere, and still the wolf restoration program continues. Hard as it may be for them to admit it, they have lost this round. This kind of conflict makes great copy, and it'll continue forever. Unfortunately, not all of the voices have been present here, which would have made the job of a daily newspaper reporter a lot easier. But the story is a good one, and it was balanced, and it was a piece of information that translated what you folks were doing at that time, your predecessors, and to whom we considered the public, which of course were our readers. It got a lot of response, and I think it advanced the cause, although that was not my job. My job was to report to the readers what was going on. What have we lost? The newspaper I worked for, the old Milwaukee Journal, an afternoon paper, an antique now, interesting to collectors. The Milwaukee Journal published, circulated 350,000 newspapers every day in Wisconsin, 600,000 on Sunday, every Sunday. What it circulated on Sunday was a paper 400 to 500 pages thick, most of it advertising. And on Wednesday, a good shopping day, we published a paper of 350 pages. We circulated it to, in 6 editions during the day. We had 6 deadlines, the last of which was called the WUP, the Wisconsin and Upper Peninsula edition, which was then trucked overnight all the way to Lake Superior. And then we pulled back so that the last edition, called the City Edition, which circulated to Milwaukee County, its deadline was at noon. Every word that went into that paper was read and edited and critiqued by 3 levels of editors. So we had a high standard for accuracy and balance and interest. It wielded great power. It still does. The Milwaukee Journal still does wield great power. When the legislature, when the Joint Finance Committee threw in the closure, the attack on open records in Wisconsin just 10 days ago or so, the Journal the Journal Sentinel broke a new tradition and ran a page 1 editorial saying, "What in the world are you thinking?" And that attack on democracy vanished overnight. You all, if you read the newspapers, you saw that it was a brief moment, but it is not over. There is a constant attack on what democracy is. I don't know how you run a democracy without a free and open media and free and open information. But, well, you don't. But these attacks are deliberate, and they're constant, and you can expect more of them. How do you attack it? I don't know. As a newspaper reporter, I would come to a meeting like this really in later days when I had a great deal of freedom, and I wouldn't try to do spot news. I would try to sit on it, absorb everything, go back for certain interviews, and write a much longer story than you would expect in a daily newspaper. But there's a dwindling there's a dwindling frequency of that kind of behavior too. But my advice to you is it's getting more difficult to get your story out in mass media if you're depending on print journalism and a daily newspaper. I'm hugely impressed by the speed with which information moves on cell phones and computers and blogs, and they have taken over the communications industry. I don't know how, you've invited the wrong person if you want to ask me how to influence that. I'm getting the hook. I have more to say later.
Hello, everyone. I'm Karen Lincoln Michel, and most of my career has been in newspapers, and it's only been in the last several months, since April, that I've been editor of Madison Magazine. So it's a different, slightly different medium that I'm in now, but I did prepare some tips about how you can get your story noticed. Every day I have dozens of press releases that come across my email inbox, and that's one way of trying to get the media's attention, but I would kind of like to look at it from an individual's point of view. and say that you have a story, and here we're talking about wildlife and the wolf population, but I think it's really important to try to make some personal connections with the people that you know in the media who have possibly covered this. But I think it's really important, even before you approach a news reporter or a media outlet about your story, is that you really try to summarize the issue at hand that as succinctly as possible. And so what I would encourage is if you write up something like maybe a paragraph or a pitch, and people talk about an elevator pitch on whatever type of thing that you want to convey to somebody. I would really recommend that you do that because as my esteemed colleague here was talking about how newspapers have changed so much, and they really have. 20 years ago, there were people who were just dedicated to covering maybe outdoor issues or the environment. Now you have reporters and editors who are doing different tasks. So there is limited time and limited resources. So it's really important to try to make some type of connection. And the main thing is just to really be prepared. In that vein of people having less time, reporters having less time, it's really important that you have some background information and try to think in terms of what type of story that you imagine maybe that you want the media to do. And it's always helpful to have some contacts for a reporter just to get them going on the story. So I really would encourage you to come with maybe a fact sheet on the issue, have some statistics that you cite as background information, and just giving context on the problem at hand. Even creating a timeline of the issue from your point of view, like what has happened, and try to get as much background information as possible. And then as far as approaching the media about a story, I always pay more attention to pitches that are directly speaking to me as the editor, and those who kind of know what the magazine is about, and trying to make that connection and stand out among the crowd that is trying to get the media's attention. And so sometimes if I get a pitch that is directed to me, I feel compelled to answer you personally, instead of getting just this generic inquiry that you've probably sent to dozens of other media outlets. So for me, that's something that triggers a response from me. And then if you're, again, succinct in your description, so there's that connection there. So that's the main thing that I would say if you have tried to get your issue out there to the media and you're kind of coming across some roadblocks. And that's great information for just an individual who wants to get their story out, but by all means, if there are organizations already out there, or maybe you're a part of one, that would be a great way to go. So for now, I guess I'll just stop there, but that was a good question.
Very good, thank you. I have other questions, but I am interested to hear what your questions are. So unless there's a lull, I'll save mine until after we've had a chance to hear from you. So yours are probably going to be really good, so we can.
So one of the issues that we've been talking about during the conference is the hound hunting of wolves. And I live in Michigan and recently moved there. But before I moved there, I remember watching the news and hearing about a debate that was going on in the state regarding mourning doves and the shooting of mourning doves. And Some of you may remember that. Some of you may have been involved in that. But, you know, and it ignited, even though it was a Michigan issue, it ignited a national debate. And everybody was talking about this all over the country, about the debate that they were having. And I don't really know, but I would imagine that national media coverage had a great deal to do with the eventual outcome, which was, it's now, I guess it's illegal there. It's
legal in Wisconsin.
Okay, so that's interesting to know. Right, it was a referendum, I guess, or something. But my point is that they strike me as similar issues. You know, it's an issue of something that's legal, that is promoted by a small group of special interest, but is anathema to most of the population. And so how do you take an issue like that, which probably, I mean, it's wolves, so it's controversy right there built in. How do you take an issue like that and launch it on a national platform? How do you ignite a wider debate even outside the state of Wisconsin or outside of whatever state the issue happens to be in? You know, are there strategies that you can take to sort of have a wider debate on some of these issues, which, frankly, I think if people knew about them, would be interested in talking about them?
Well, again, this is Chuck, and I occasionally file for National Public Radio. I'm not employed by NPR, and they have staff members in Chicago, and they will also fly in other reporters from other things to cover Scott Walker or something. But some of the times when I've had success getting things on NPR is when it's a first here, or it's a hotter issue here than it has been before, or there's some sort of political angle now. Pretty much any story involving Scott Walker in some way has a chance of getting on NPR. Again, I think Sean is doing the John Doe thing today about Walker. So it's can be really kind of specific to the time and the issue, but if it's a big deal, I mean, it just help us understand that, okay, you know, like Chuck, this isn't just happening here, it's happening in 5 other states. You know, you should really understand that. And I think sometimes it's just making the reporter, making sure the reporter is aware of why this is important in more than just one location. Sometimes one location is enough, but you know, the more broader you can make the story, the more likely that editors, national editors, will be interested.
I always found that whether a story moved from local interest to national interest was unpredictable and chaotic. And it had to do with human behavior, which is unpredictable and chaotic. But in doing the story, reporters have an obligation to stress numbers, which I take to be to stress science. The reporters have an obligation to be accurate, and they have to deal with facts. So that's where you people come in as a resource, and a conference like this comes in as a resource, and the papers thereby stand as a resource. Newspaper reporting is not a peer-reviewed. Well, it is in a sense. It's editor-reviewed, but it has a higher standard than digital communication. We all know that. But people are smart enough to sort through even digital communication. Most people are. Some people are. I don't know.
Right. What I would add to that is that if there is an urgency of some kind, like if there is national legislation, and there is in this case, isn't there? That would make it a national story. And then, you know, if the story is not just about a local issue, but kind of broadens it out to say it's happened in these other areas nationally, that's one thing. But I think the other thing is that With the power of social media today, it's really important that when that story does come out, that there be some kind of a strategy for a social media blitz on behalf of, the organizers of any group. That certainly would help to trigger or spark some conversation in other parts of the country. That's the thing that I would add.
I have a question. First of all, thank you. I'm in PR, so you guys are my best friends. I would like to ask, with the importance of the stories that we want told, when we're pitching them to the media, besides the tips that you've already provided us, what are some things that we may not want to do that will definitely not help us get our stories told? Thank you.
Don't overwhelm us. We're busy, our time is limited, our space is limited, and our interest is limited. So you be sure that the content of your material has a basic interest as well as serving what you're advocating. You're trying to reach people who have no motive, a lot of people who have no motive to be interested in the subject at all unless it is innately interesting to most people. That's a tough one. I really do believe it's a chaotic system and things happen by accident.
One of the things I would say is don't be the boy who cried wolf. You come to the media all the time with things that range from, a small deal to, like really gripping problems. And it would be great to have a relationship developed, just as, it was still the case where there are beat reporters. So you would want to be considered as a source for, you're saying the Ho-Chunk Nation, that reporters can think, oh, I'm going to contact Ann Thundercloud because she is a reliable source and I want to know what's happening with the Ho-Chunk Nation. I haven't done a story on them for a while. So you kind of want to gain that reputation as someone that the media can trust as a really important source, and that you're the one who kind of puts the media in touch with other people, or you're the go-to person where, hey, this isn't necessarily a Ho-Chunk story, but maybe Ann would know because Ann is really connected in that part of the community. So I would say that that's the kind of thing that you want to do, but don't inundate the media with, like I'm saying, a wide range of things.
That's a much better answer than I gave you. I'd like to throw a perspective from an outsider here as really a journalist. You people seem to be developing a lot of angst about your cause, which I understand and am sympathetic with and am interested in. But standing back and over a period of time, I hope you believe, as I do, that the history of wolf restoration in Wisconsin is a tremendous success. It really is. It went far beyond expectations from the story that I wrote 25 years ago, and you should be proud of that. And I take hope in it. And I guess my advice to you is use the media in any way you can, but keep doing what you're doing. Because, and if I can give you something from the wolf culture, defend your territory, fight back. That's really my advice, which as a newspaper reporter, I wouldn't have been able to give it to you.
And just quickly, I would just say, don't wait until the last minute. About 3 weeks ago, the Federal Health and Human Services press office let me know off the record, let a few other reporters know that the Health and Human Services Secretary was going to be in Milwaukee. Would you like, 5 minutes with her to talk about the Burwell decision before it came out? So, I mean, sometimes you can let reporters know if they'll promise to sort of keep it under their hat a week ahead of something's coming down the pike. Sometimes, breaking news you can't, but if you can let people know and sort of figure out a way to negotiate a holding of the story, which sometimes will happen unless it's, as I say, in the public interest to get it out right away. So if you, advance notice helps. I scrawl notes on calendars all the time, like this is happening a week from now, you know. So that's what I would say, just to try to let us know in a, at least in sort of an informal way when you do.
So I have a question that has two parts. First of all, I've watched with a great deal of dismay the disappearance of investigative journalism. What we have now seems to have been, it's replaced with, we have a problem where balance has replaced objectivity. And so you can have a balanced piece in the media where, yeah, it is balanced, you have both sides of the story, but the science is overwhelming on one side and it's just opinion on the other side. Part of the reason that I've been proposing a code of professional conduct for legislators is to deal with this problem, where in a transparent way, our legislators are required to provide access to how they make decisions. So to give the media the opportunity to see the science from all sides and to be able to have the opportunity that investigative journalists used to get when they would get the funding from their editors to go out there and do the real story, and regardless of whether or not it was going to make money for the publication or the media. So I just wanted to, as journalists, what do you think this would help if legislators had to make decisions more in the public eye so that you could measure whether they were against, whether they were in the favor of the public interest and how they were making those decisions?
Well, to your point about, you know, investigative journalism, yeah, I agree. It's been less of a priority than it has been, just the economic downturn and then a more focus on other things. So that's one of the reasons that the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism was started, and it's nonprofit. And so that's all it does is investigative work. And the center has done some stories on wildlife and the environment. So that's a big focus area. But as far as what you're saying about lawmakers, I mean, I think Wisconsin in general, I mean, I've worked in other states, and I just came from Louisiana recently, and the openness of government is even less. And so I come back to Wisconsin, and I am, you know, glad that there are online records that you can get. You can see who is funding lawmakers. You can see their voting records. So that kind of information is available to the public, which is great. But it's also incumbent upon the media to expose a lot of things and regularly report on, you know, the activities of lawmakers. So in that sense, I think what you're asking also is, you know, to be fair and balanced in the, you know, science part of it as well. And I think one of the things that the center strives to do is provide data. There's data collection, and so that's a big part of what the center does, and I think that sort of addresses your problem too, because it has to be fact-based, and we strive to have, you know, scientific evidence to back up whatever story that we're delving into.
I guess I'm having a trouble trying to figure out what media we're talking about. The media is such an umbrella word, and once again, you're talking about every form of communication going on all of the time. Without being specific about which media have failed, I can't answer the question. I read the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel because it's local for me, and I know they do, for their much more limited resources than they had when I was working for the Milwaukee Journal, a different newspaper. they have concentrated on investigative journalism. They've won 3 Pulitzer Prizes in the last 5 years for investigative reporting. So you're not talking about that medium. You're talking about media, which is such a diffuse idea. It's like the public. I have no idea what it is. I served the public for 35 years. I have no idea who they are. And I don't think you do either. And so if you want to be specific about what did the Journal Sentinel, how did the Journal Sentinel botch or perform on that story, I could help you, but I can't answer your question.
One thing I would just say just quickly is that we do try at public radio in even really short 45-second stories to accurately describe the balance at a public meeting or public hearing. The other day I covered the DNR meeting on the Kohler golf course proposal, and it was clear that the critics of the proposal turned out in far larger numbers than the pro-Kohler people, and I tried to reflect that even in a short story. So we do try, even though it is difficult in a short story to do that. And the other thing I would just add is that WPR, in the name of my late colleague Mike Simonson, perhaps many of you knew him from working in Superior for many years, we are adding an investigative journalist as well that will work with CIJ folks. So we're trying.
My question has to do with spin. I mean, everyone in this room here, I think we all do the best we can in presenting the most accurate information to a reporter for a story. And I think the highest compliment is when a reporter contacts me and says, can you give me your source, give me your data? And I'm going, yeah, here it is. I'll start sending the emails now. And I just love it when they do that. But so often, the other side will present a story and it's not fact-checked, and it's a total spin and misleading. And then it seems like we're on the defense then trying to go, but wait a minute, that's not accurate. How do we combat when this happens most often, I think, in printed material, where they'll give the story and they'll take the lead, say a press release on hunting with hounds, I'll just use that as an example, and they'll use that press release without verifying any of the information. The wolves are killing all the deer, and I've seen those kinds of stories, and so has everybody else. And how do we get our side out before it's printed, where the reporter doesn't take the time to contact?
Complain to the editor.
Okay.
No, it isn't. You can get corrections. There's a lot of there's such a mountain of crap out there that it's too late for everybody. But you still have to try. You still have to complain, and you have to get the record set straight.
I mentioned before that I have been with newspapers for many years, more than 25 years, and then just recently I'm with a magazine. And I have just been so impressed by the magazine's fact-checking as well as WCIJ, and that's part of the whole process of a story. And the fact-checking process is really comprehensive, and just even small details are double-checked and sometimes triple-checked. And so that's what I love about working for a magazine. In daily journalism, it was, you had to hustle, and you had to, the reporter themselves have to really fact-check themselves. And so sometimes there's, I guess more potential for error, but, I would suggest maybe working with a magazine or WCIJ on a story.
My just real brief comment is to maybe suggest back to the media outlet another take at it. In other words, as I said before, we do both these short spot news things and these longer features. Follow up with us and say, well, you did that thing and we had a little issue with it. Can you correct it if it's wrong? Or can you do another take at it later in the week or over the next few days before the next, sometimes the Journal Sentinel will break a story, but the hearing isn't for 2 more weeks or something, or there is a hearing coming up on it. that's scheduled based on the Journal-Sentinel story, for example, or Wisconsin State Journal, or whatever, find a way to remind us there's another take at this coming. Maybe you want to do something right before the legislators are holding a hearing. Or contact our talk show. We haven't really talked about our talk show people. They're another way to get the folks out and maybe a longer 5, 10, 15-minute interview.
Okay, this is fascinating, but we're running a little bit short on, not short on time, we're on time. We're on time. So I am going to thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Your stuff was valuable-ish. And we're going to call up our next speaker, which is Dave Clausen, Dr. Dave Clausen. Thank you.